A waitress paid the bill for an 80-year-old beggar and was fired. The next day, she received a phone call. On a busy avenue in Mexico City, a simple act of compassion led a young waitress to lose her job. Valentina, guided by her heart, decided to help an elderly homeless woman living on the streets, not imagining that this decision would change their lives forever. What seemed like an ordinary day turned into an unexpected journey of deep connections, emotional revelations, and second chances. Sometimes, fate brings people into our lives who challenge us to be better and to believe that even in the darkest situations, light can be found. The sun shone brightly over the bustling Avenida Reforma, in the heart of Mexico City. The Café de la Vida buzzed with the energy of customers coming and going, enveloped in the inviting aroma of fresh coffee and freshly baked pastries. Valentina, a young waitress with short, dark hair, skillfully moved between the tables, serving with a smile on her face and contagious joy. Her vibrant spirit lit up the cafe, where conversations were accompanied by the clinking of cups and the soft hum of background music. Valentina enjoyed working at the cafe. It wasn't the job of her dreams, but there was something special about the daily interactions with customers and how a simple gesture of attention could transform someone's day. The Café de la Vida had become more than just a workplace for her. It was a refuge, a space where she felt useful and valued. She knew most of the regular customers by name, knew their favorite orders, and took pride in memorizing even the smallest details, like who preferred their coffee without sugar or who always ordered an extra croissant. That particular day, while attending to a group of friends who were laughing and sharing stories, her gaze drifted toward the cafe store. There, leaning against the brick wall, was Donna Luz, an elderly woman with a tired expression, deep and sad eyes that seemed to carry the weight of a lifetime. Her tattered and dirty clothes hung off her thin body, and she extended her hand, begging passers-by for alms. The young waitress felt a knot in her heart at the sight. The woman's presence on the streets was recurrent, but that day it seemed that the pain in her eyes was more intense, more palpable. "Are you okay, Donna Luz?" Valentina murmured, approaching the door, but soon a customer called her, interrupting her urge to sit next to the woman. "Just a moment, please." She smiled at the customer, while her gaze remained on the beggar. "I'll bring you something." Donna Luz watched Valentina with a mixture of gratitude and resignation, knowing that the young woman couldn't do much. In recent months, she had gotten used to living on the street, accepting the crumbs that society offered her. However, there was something special about Valentina that made her feel a small flame of hope. "Thank you, my dear," she murmured in a hoarse and trembling voice. "Just a little food?" Valentina finished attending to the customers and, with a quick glance at the manager, decided that she couldn't ignore Donna Luz's request. She headed to the kitchen and, in an act of bravery, asked the cook for an extra plate. "It's just a soup," he said, raising an eyebrow in doubt. "You know we can't give away food like this. Please, just this once." "She needs it," Valentina implored, her eyes shining with determination. The cook sighed but finally agreed. "All right, but you'll have to take responsibility for this." With a grateful gesture, Valentina took the soup and left the cafe, heading to the door where Donna Luz was. "Here it is, Donna Luz. I brought you something," Valentina said, handing over the plate with a smile. The elderly woman looked at the soup with tears in her eyes, a mixture of surprise and gratitude filling her heart. "You're a good girl, Valentina. The world needs more people like you." "It's nothing, I hope this helps a little," Valentina replied, feeling happy to make a difference, however small. Donna Luz smiled, but the joy was quickly replaced by a distant look. "If you knew what I've been through, what I've lost," her voice broke, and she looked at the ground, where dry leaves had accumulated. Valentina sensed the woman's sadness and, for a moment, wished she could get to know her better. "If you want to talk, I'm here," she said, sitting on the ground next to Donna Luz with the soup in her hands. "Sometimes talking helps." The elderly woman hesitated and, after a moment, began to tell her story. "When my son Rodrigo was little, I had a home, a family. But life isn't what we dream, my dear. The decisions we make sometimes lead us to dark places." Valentina listened attentively, feeling the weight of Donna Luz's words. "What happened to Rodrigo?" she asked, intrigued. "He doesn't know where I am. I didn't have the courage to look for him. After leaving him, I thought it would be better this way. Time passed, and I got lost in the streets. I just survived. Now, I'm only a shadow of what I used to be." Donna Luz looked at Valentina, her eyes filled with tears. "But you are light. You are everything I no longer am." Valentina felt a lump in her throat, but before she could respond, the cafe manager, a burly man named Miguel, appeared at the door. His expression was severe, and his eyes fixed on Valentina, who was still standing next to Donna Luz. "What are you doing out here?" "Get back to work," he ordered, in an authoritative voice. "I was just helping," Valentina began, but Miguel wasn't willing to listen. "It's not your job to help beggars. That tarnishes the cafe's image. If you keep this up, you can expect consequences," he said, the anger evident in his tone. "But she needs help. Look at her." Valentina defended herself, standing up, the soup forgotten in her hands. "It's just a plate of food, and that's not what you were hired to do. If you can't follow the rules, maybe you shouldn't be working here." Miguel's fury was palpable, and Valentina felt desolate. "I did what I thought was right," Valentina replied, her voice trembling. "I can't just ignore someone in need. That's what being human is, Miguel. Human or not, you're putting the cafe at risk. Now, get back to work or face the consequences," he retorted, crossing his arms. Valentina looked at Donna Luz, who was watching her silently, and felt a growing pressure in her chest. It was unfair, so unfair. "You can't fire me for doing what's right," she said, with determination growing inside her. "I'm sorry, Valentina, but you have no choice. If you don't come back, I'll have to fire you," Miguel declared before walking away, leaving Valentina alone with her indignation and confusion. Donna Luz, sensing the young woman's despair, gently touched her arm. "My dear, don't worry about me. You did what you had to. That kindness will not be forgotten," she whispered, her voice filled with wisdom. "I don't want you to go hungry," Valentina replied, fighting back the tears that threatened to fall. I don't know what to do now. Sometimes, life presents challenges so that we can find our true strength," Donna Luz said, looking into Valentina's eyes with deep understanding. "You have a good heart, and that's what matters." Valentina took a deep breath, trying to gather the strength that Donna Luz seemed to have in abundance. "I'm going to fight for you. I can't leave you like this," she promised, feeling more determined than ever. The two women, separated by generations and life experiences so different, shared a moment of connection that transcended their circumstances. Valentina knew her life was about to change in ways she couldn't imagine. But for now, the only certainty she had was that she would do everything possible to help Donna Luz, regardless of the consequences she might face. That night, Valentina could hardly sleep. Miguel's words echoed in her mind, mixed with the image of Donna Luz, lonely and vulnerable on the sidewalk. She knew she had done the right thing, but the cost weighed heavily on her heart. What would happen now? How could she help Donna Luz if she herself was struggling to survive? The next morning, dressed in a simple blouse and worn-out jeans, Valentina walked through the streets of Mexico City in search of a new job. The sun shone brightly, but her mind was clouded with uncertainties. Every store she passed seemed to send her messages of rejection, as if the doors were closed just for her. The feeling of helplessness enveloped her like a dense fog. As she walked, memories of her grandmother flooded her mind. Donna Mercedes, as she was affectionately called, had raised Valentina since she was a little girl. Valentina's parents died in a car accident when she was only 5 years old, and it was Donna Mercedes who took on the responsibility of raising her granddaughter. She was a strong, determined, and loving woman, and Valentina loved her more than anything in the world. Valentina remembered how Donna Mercedes always said, "Valentina, love is what keeps us alive. Even when everything else fails, love is what sustains us." Those words resonated in her mind, like a reminder of what really mattered. Her grandmother had passed away a few years ago, and Valentina missed her every day. But now, upon finding Dona Luz, she felt there was a connection, as if her grandmother were somehow watching over her through this elderly woman. As Valentina walked, she thought about how her grandmother would have reacted to the situation. Dona Mercedes was always a woman of principles, who firmly believed in helping others, regardless of the circumstances. Valentina knew that if her grandmother were alive, she would have supported her decision to help Dona Luz, even if it meant losing her job. But knowing this didn't make the pain go away. Why is all this happening? Valentina wondered, looking up at the sky. I just wanted to help. She remembered Dona Luz, how the elderly woman had looked at her with gratitude. Even in the midst of despair, Valentina felt a spark of hope. If she could find the elderly woman again, perhaps she could offer her some comfort, even if it meant sharing a piece of bread or a glass of water. Meanwhile, Dona Luz continued with her routine, sitting in the same corner, watching the movement of people. Her eyes, though tired, still shone with wisdom acquired over the years. She noticed the sadness in some faces, the hurry in others, and wondered how many stories were intertwined in that hurry. If people only knew what really matters, she thought. Life is made up of moments, of connections, not money or material possessions. She didn't know that Valentina was looking for her. In that corner, Dona Luz felt invisible, even surrounded by so many people. But her hope never completely left her. She believed that somewhere, someone remembered her and cared about her. So, she continued begging, not just out of necessity, but also with the hope that someday something would change. After a few hours wandering the streets, Valentina finally decided to return to the Café de la Vida. The longing for the place drew her back like a magnet. When she arrived, the cafe was full, but she didn't dare to enter. The manager was still there, and just the thought of seeing him again made her feel ashamed. Instead, she sat on a nearby bench, watching customers go in and out, laughing and chatting carefree. As she sat there, watching the movement, Valentina felt a familiar presence. She looked to the side and saw Dona Luz walking slowly down the sidewalk. Valentina's heart raced, and she quickly got up, rushing to meet the elderly woman. Doña Luz, Valentina exclaimed, almost out of breath. The elderly woman lifted her head, surprised and smiling. My dear, did you come to see me? Dona Luz replied, joy lighting up her wrinkled face. I'm so grateful to you. Today, I even got a little more food. How are you? Valentina hesitated, her words tangled in her mind. I'm actually not doing so well. I got fired from the cafe because of you. Dona Luz frowned, concern taking over her expression. Oh, my dear, I didn't want this to happen. You just did what you thought was right. The world needs more people like you. But I don't know what to do now, Valentina confessed, feeling a lump forming in her throat. I'm looking for a new job, but it's hard. I can't stop thinking about my grandmother. She was so much like you. Dona Luz looked at Valentina with understanding eyes, as if she knew exactly what the young woman was feeling. I once had a granddaughter, you know? She was my world, just as you were your grandmother's world. Those words hit Valentina hard. She had always known that her grandmother meant everything to her. But hearing Dona Luz talk about her own granddaughter brought back all the emotions she had been repressing. I miss her every day, Dona Luz continued in a soft voice. But when I see you, I feel like a part of her is still here, like there's still a chance to make up for what was lost. Valentina fought to hold back the tears, but she couldn't. They began to roll silently down her face as she listened to Dona Luz. My grandmother always said that love keeps us alive, even when everything else fails. I think that's what brought me to you. I couldn't leave you alone, just as I never would have left my grandmother alone. Dona Luz smiled at Valentina, a smile that was both sad and full of understanding. You have a big heart, my dear, and I'm grateful for that. We'll face this together, okay? Valentina nodded, feeling lighter than she had in days. She knew there were still many difficulties ahead, but now, with Dona Luz by her side, she felt she could face anything. As they said goodbye, Valentina promised to return. I'll bring you something to eat. You can't stay here alone. Dona Luz smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her tired face. I'll be here, my dear. And remember, You're stronger than you think." Valentina walked away from the encounter with a heart full of hope and determination. Life had knocked her down, but she wasn't willing to stay down. With the memory of Dona Luz and her grandmother in her mind, she felt renewed. The world could be cruel, but kindness still existed, and she was determined to find it. Valentina was at home, sitting at the small kitchen table, when the phone rang. The sound made her jump a little, breaking the monotony of that afternoon. With a slight knot in her stomach, she answered, not knowing that this call would change the course of her life and Dona Luz's. "Hello?" She answered, trying to control the expectation in her voice. "Hello. Is this Valentina?" The voice on the other end was firm but polite. "I'm the assistant to Mr. Rodrigo. He would like to know where she is. She disappeared a few days ago, and he's worried." Valentina's heart raced. The mention of Rodrigo, the man who owned a chain of supermarkets and who, unknowingly, carried the shadow of a mother in a precarious situation, made her feel a mix of hope and apprehension. But why would Rodrigo be looking for Dona Luz? Valentina didn't know what to think, but one thing was certain. This call was important. "Doña Luz?" Valentina murmured, almost without thinking. "She's here on the street. Please, can you tell me where?" The assistant seemed impatient, but also a little understanding. "Mr. Rodrigo is desperate. He has searched several places, but she hasn't returned home." Valentina hung up and looked out the window, where Dona Luz used to sit, the same corner that now seemed so distant. The elderly woman, with her tired gaze and her body hunched under the weight of years, had a story that Valentina was only beginning to understand. And now, this call might be the opportunity for reconciliation that both of them needed. The young woman grabbed her coat and headed to the corner. The sun was beginning to set, tinting the sky a soft orange. As she approached Dona Luz, Valentina noticed that the elderly woman was quieter than usual, with her eyes fixed on an indefinite point on the ground. "Doña Luz," Valentina called out with a smile. "I have something important to tell you." The beggar slowly lifted her head, and Valentina could see curiosity mixed with distrust in her gaze. "What's going on, dear?" Dona Luz asked, adjusting the shawl around her shoulders. Valentina hesitated for a moment, thinking about how the news might be received. It was a delicate moment, and Dona Luz could react in many ways. "I just received a call from Rodrigo's assistant. He wants to know where you are and wants to find you." The words came out hurriedly, as if they were a bubble about to burst. Dona Luz's expression instantly changed. Distrust gave way to disbelief. "Rodrigo?" she murmured, almost voiceless. "Is he looking for me?" "Yes," Valentina confirmed, excited. "I thought you might want to go home. This might be the opportunity for you two to reunite." Dona Luz turned her head, looking toward the street, as if memories were chasing her. Silence lingered, and Valentina could feel the tension in the air. "I don't know, Valentina," said Dona Luz, her voice faltering. "I don't know if I'm ready for this." I ran away because she hesitated, trying to organize her confused thoughts because I felt like I was in the way. I didn't want to be a burden to him. Valentina approached, sitting next to the elderly woman. "What do you have to lose?" she asked gently. "He's your son. He's worried about you. He wants you to come back." Dona Luz closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. The internal struggle was visible on her wrinkled face. "What if he doesn't forgive me?" she inquired, her vulnerability on full display. "What if he doesn't want to see me?" Valentina took Dona Luz's hand, holding it warmly. "Sometimes life gives us second chances. You can't let fear stop you from trying. The love you have for him is worth it." Dona Luz looked at Valentina, and the young woman saw a spark of hope emerge in the elderly woman's eyes. "Do you really think he still cares?" Dona Luz's voice trembled, but there was a new brightness in her gaze. "I know he does. He's looking for you. He wants you to come home." After a moment of reflection, Dona Luz finally nodded. "Okay, Valentina, I'll go." Valentina smiled broadly, feeling warmth in her chest. "Perfect. Let's get ready then. You're going to shine." The two women got up and headed to Dona Luz's home, where Valentina helped the elderly woman get ready, choosing a slightly cleaner skirt and a blouse she had kept with care. The transformation wasn't just physical, it was an emotional rebirth. As she helped Donna Luz get ready, Valentina couldn't help but remember her own grandmother, Donna Mercedes, who always told her that outer appearance was a reflection of the inner soul. "Dress well, my dear, because the world will see the light you carry inside," Donna Mercedes used to say, and Valentina now repeated those words to Donna Luz as she helped her fix her hair and apply a bit of light makeup. Valentina noticed that as she helped Donna Luz get ready, the elderly woman's trembling hands revealed not only age, but also the weight of longing and pain. The young woman tried to be a pillar of support. "Look at you," Valentina exclaimed, as Donna Luz admired herself in the dusty mirror. "You look beautiful." Donna Luz smiled shyly, and for a brief moment, the sadness she carried seemed to dissipate a little. "What if I don't know what to say?" the elderly woman asked, the insecurity returning. "Speak of your love, of your longing. Just be yourself. Rodrigo needs to know who you are." And so, with hearts pounding with anticipation and fear, Donna Luz and Valentina set off for the luxurious office where Rodrigo was waiting for them. The path seemed long, each step carrying a greater weight than the last. Valentina tried to keep the conversation light, but Donna Luz seemed lost in her own thoughts. When they finally arrived at Rodrigo's building, the grandeur of the place made Donna Luz's heart race. The white walls and mirrored windows reflected not only the daylight, but also the reality she had left behind. "Remember, you're strong," Valentina whispered, holding Donna Luz's hand as they waited in the lobby. "You've made it this far. You could do it again." Donna Luz took a deep breath and, with a hesitant movement, followed Valentina into the elevator. The sound of the doors closing echoed, and as they ascended each floor, the anxiety increased. When they finally arrived at the office, Rodrigo was there, standing, looking out the window. He turned as he heard the door open, and his eyes met Donna Luz's. The elderly woman felt a shiver in her stomach, as if time had stopped. Rodrigo quickly approached, relief visible in his eyes. "Mom," he exclaimed, without hesitation, wrapping her in a tight hug. "I was so worried about you. Where have you been?" Donna Luz, a little surprised by Rodrigo's reaction, hesitated before responding. She looked at Valentina, as if seeking help, and the young woman gave her a slight nod, encouraging her to speak. I didn't know if I should come back." Donna Luz began, her voice trembling. "I didn't want to be a burden to you, Rodrigo. I got lost and then I just couldn't come back." Rodrigo gently pulled her away to look into her eyes, still holding her arms firmly. "Mom, you will never be a burden to me," he said, his voice full of emotion. "I was desperate when you disappeared. You're all I have." Donna Luz remained silent for a moment, processing her son's words. The relief and guilt mixed inside her, while Valentina watched with a heavy heart. "Rodrigo, I'm so sorry," murmured Donna Luz, with tears rolling down her cheeks. I just wanted you to be happy without having to worry about me." Rodrigo wiped the tears from his mother's face and held her hands firmly. "All I want is for you to be by my side, Mom. No matter what happens, we'll face this together." Donna Luz slowly nodded, a sense of peace finally settling in her heart. Valentina, feeling that her mission was accomplished, took a step back, letting mother and son enjoy that moment of reconciliation. She knew that now Rodrigo would take care of Donna Luz, ensuring that she received the love and care she deserved. As she watched the scene, Valentina felt a mix of sadness and gratitude. Sadness because her own grandmother was no longer there to receive the same care, and gratitude for having been able to help Donna Luz find her way back home. Rodrigo, realizing Valentina's presence, called her back. "Valentina, come here," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "I couldn't have done this without your help. I don't know how to thank you enough." Valentina smiled, trying to hold back the tears. "You don't need to thank me, Rodrigo. I just did what I thought was right. Donna Luz, she reminds me so much of my grandmother. I couldn't leave her alone." Rodrigo nodded, understanding the depth of Valentina's words. "I want you to know that you'll always have a place in our lives," he continued. "If you need anything at all, I'm here. You've become part of our family." Donna Luz, still holding her son's hand, looked at Valentina with tenderness. "Valentina, you're a special young woman," she said kindly. "You've given me back my son. I'll never be able to thank you enough for this." Valentina, feeling emotionally overwhelmed, simply nodded. "Thank you, Dona Luz. I've also learned a lot from you, and I know my grandmother would be proud of what we've done together." Rodrigo, realizing how much Valentina meant to his mother and to himself, made a decision. "Valentina, I'd like to offer you something more than words. I'm starting a new social project to help homeless people, and I'd love for you to be part of it. You've already shown that you have the heart and determination to help others, and I can't think of anyone better to lead this initiative." Valentina was surprised by the offer, not knowing what to say. "Rodrigo, this is incredible. I would be honored to be part of this." "Then it's a deal," Rodrigo replied, smiling. "We'll do it together. For my mother, for your grandmother, and for all the people who need a second chance." As Dona Luz, Rodrigo, and Valentina said their goodbyes that night, Valentina felt she had found a new purpose. She had started as a simple waitress, but now, thanks to her compassionate heart and willingness to help, she was about to embark on a new adventure. In the end, Valentina not only helped Dona Luz find her way back, but she also found her own. And as life went on, the legacy of love and compassion she had learned from her grandmother and shared with Dona Luz continued to shine, like a light that never goes out. Dona Luz looked out the window of the luxurious office, her trembling hands holding a small handkerchief. The streets of Mexico City, full of life and movement, seemed so distant from the reality she was living now. Rodrigo, her son, was there in front of her, a grown and successful man, but to her, almost a stranger at times. The pain of not having been there, as he grew up, mixed with the torment of sometimes not being able to remember important details of her own life. Rodrigo spoke of his achievements, his victories in the business world, but Dona Luz, in a rare moment of lucidity, struggled to absorb every word, fearing the moment when her mind might betray her. "I always dreamed of having a better life, Mom," Rodrigo said enthusiastically, his eyes shining. "And I made it. Today, I own a chain of supermarkets. All the effort was worth it." The pride in his voice was evident. But for Dona Luz, who was facing the challenges of Alzheimer's, those words brought a mix of joy and sadness. She wanted to be happy for him, but she knew that at any moment she could forget that conversation. "I'm so proud of you," she managed to murmur, her voice trembling. But inside, the anguish consumed her. "Will I remember this tomorrow?" she thought, with the fear of losing more memories growing. Rodrigo, sensing the slight distancing in his mother's gaze, stopped talking for a moment. He knew that Alzheimer's was progressing, knew that not every day would be like this one, when she could remember him and his story. The understanding of what was happening to his mother hit him like a painful wave, but he tried to stay calm. "I'm so sorry, Mom, for all the time we were apart. I wish you had been with me all these years," Rodrigo said, taking his mother's hand. Dona Luz looked at him, her eyes full of tears. "I do too, my son, but sometimes things don't turn out the way we plan," she replied, her voice breaking. "I just wish I could remember everything, every detail." Rodrigo squeezed his mother's hand tighter. "The important thing is that we're together now. No matter what happens, I'm here for you. We'll face this together." Dona Luz nodded, trying to absorb as much of this moment as possible, knowing that soon it might be another that would be erased from her mind. "I'm so scared of forgetting you, Rodrigo," she confessed, as tears finally streamed down her face. Rodrigo leaned in and hugged her tightly. "It doesn't matter if you forget me, Mom. I'll never forget you. Every day with you is a gift, and we'll make the most of it." The emotion of the moment was overwhelming for both of them. Dona Luz knew that her memory was fading, and Rodrigo was determined to make sure the days they had left were filled with love and care. They spent the rest of the day together, talking about the past and the present, creating new memories, even if these could disappear from Dona Luz's mind in the near future. As night approached, Valentina arrived to take Dona Luz home. Seeing them together, Valentina felt a mix of joy and sadness. She knew time was precious for both of them, and that every day was a battle against forgetfulness. Before saying goodbye, Rodrigo made a promise to his mother. "I'll be here every day, Mom. We'll get through this together, one day at a time." Dona Luz smiled, still with tears in her eyes, but with her heart warmed by her son's love. Although with the limitations that Alzheimer's imposed, she knew she wasn't alone. And as they embraced, Valentina watched with the certainty that, despite everything, love was still stronger than any illness. The following days were an emotional roller coaster for Rodrigo. Sometimes, Dona Luz clearly remembered who he was, and those moments brought him immense happiness. But other days, the illness took over, and she looked at him as if he were a stranger, which broke Rodrigo's heart. The anguish of seeing her lose herself was deep, and Valentina witnessed Rodrigo's internal struggle as he tried to stay strong. One afternoon, while accompanying his mother on a walk through a nearby park, Dona Luz abruptly stopped and looked at Rodrigo with a puzzled expression. "Where are we? Who are you?" she asked with fear reflected in her eyes. Rodrigo felt as if a knife had been plunged into his heart. He knew the illness was advancing, but each time it happened, it was like reliving the pain for the first time. Rodrigo tried to stay calm. "Mom, it's me, Rodrigo, your son. We're taking a walk, like we used to when I was little," he said in a soft, though restrained voice. Dona Luz looked at him intently, trying to remember, but the confusion persisted. I'm sorry I don't remember you," she murmured with tears in her eyes. Rodrigo hugged her, trying to console her, though his own pain was palpable. "It's okay, Mom. I'm here with you. I'll always be here with you," he assured her as he gently cradled her. But the confusion didn't dissipate. Suddenly, Dona Luz began to take small steps toward the street, as if she were trying to get away from Rodrigo. "I need to go back. I have to go home. My family is waiting for me," she murmured, clearly disoriented. Rodrigo gently but firmly stopped her. "Mom, this is your home now. I'm here with you, and you don't need to go anywhere. Please, come with me," he pleaded, trying to get her to understand. Valentina, who had been watching from nearby, quickly approached to help. "Dona Luz, please listen to me. Rodrigo is your son, and we're here to take care of you," she said in a calming voice. However, Dona Luz seemed increasingly distressed. "Let me go. I don't know you. Where is my husband? He's waiting for me," she cried as she tried to break free from Rodrigo's arms. Desperate, Rodrigo whispered, "Mom, please, it's me, Rodrigo. I won't leave you alone." It was then that something seemed to click in Dona Luz's mind. Her eyes focused on Rodrigo's face, and a spark of recognition appeared in her gaze. "Rodrigo, my son, I'm sorry, I got lost for a moment," she said, her voice trembling as tears began to flow. Rodrigo hugged her tightly, tears also in his eyes. "It's okay, Mom. I'm here with you. Don't worry," he assured her as he led her back home. That episode made it clear to Rodrigo and Valentina that Dona Luz's condition was worsening. They knew they had to do more to help her and keep her safe. So, the next day, they took her to a neurology clinic for a series of tests. The doctor, a man with a serious but compassionate expression, received them in his office after reviewing the results. "Dona Luz's Alzheimer's is in an advanced stage," he explained in a grave voice. "The episodes of disorientation and forgetfulness are becoming more frequent, and it's likely that these will intensify in the coming months." Rodrigo felt the world collapse around him as he listened to the doctor's words. Although he knew his mother's illness was progressing, hearing the confirmation forced him to face a reality he had been avoiding. "What can we do, doctor?" Rodrigo asked, his voice filled with desperation. "The main focus is to keep Dona Luz in a familiar and calm environment. It's vital that she feels safe and surrounded by people who care for and love her. We can also adjust her medication to help manage the symptoms. Although, unfortunately, we can't stop the progression of the disease," the doctor explained. Rodrigo nodded, though he felt that every word from the doctor was a reminder of how fragile the time left with his mother was. Valentina, who had been sitting silently during the consultation, leaned forward and took Dona Luz's hand. "Dona Luz, we're going to take care of you. No matter what happens, "You won't be alone," she said, with firm determination in her voice. Dona Luz, in a rare moment of clarity, squeezed Valentina's hand and nodded, though her expression reflected a mix of fear and resignation. After the consultation, Rodrigo and Valentina committed to doing everything possible to make sure Dona Luz felt loved and protected. They knew the road ahead would be tough, but they also knew they wouldn't walk it alone. The days following the medical consultation were difficult for Rodrigo and Valentina. Each day presented new challenges, but both were determined to keep Dona Luz as comfortable and safe as possible. The routine of caring for Dona Luz became an act of love and dedication. Despite the challenges, Valentina always found ways to make Dona Luz feel special. She prepared her favorite meals, talked with her about the memories she could still evoke, and read aloud passages from her favorite books. She knew that those small gestures meant the world to Dona Luz, even if she couldn't always remember them the next day. Rodrigo, for his part, made an effort to spend as much time as possible with his mother. He often sat with her in the garden, talking about his childhood and the moments they had shared before they were separated. Every conversation was an attempt to keep the connection between them alive, despite the ravages Alzheimer's was causing. One afternoon, while Valentina was preparing dinner, Rodrigo sat with his mother in the living room. Dona Luz was calmer that day, though her gaze sometimes drifted into the distance. "Mom," Rodrigo began, taking her hand gently, "I was thinking about all the things we used to do together. Do you remember when we used to go to the fair?" Dona Luz smiled, though her gaze remained somewhat distant. "Yes, the fair. We used to go every summer. You loved riding the rides." Rodrigo smiled, though he knew his mother's memory was fragile. "Yes, Mom, I loved it. And you always bought me cotton candy, even though you knew I would get it all over my clothes," he said, laughing softly. Dona Luz looked at him with a spark of recognition in her eyes. "You were a mischievous boy, Rodrigo, but you were always my pride, my life." Dona Luz's words deeply touched Rodrigo. He knew that every moment like this was a gift, one that couldn't be taken for granted. He leaned in and kissed her on the forehead. "You're my life too, Mom, and you always will be." That night, as they ate dinner, Valentina noticed that Dona Luz was quieter than usual. As the meal progressed, Dona Luz's gaze became more confused, as if she were struggling to keep hold of reality. "Rodrigo," she suddenly said, in an unsure voice. "Where are we? Is this our home?" Rodrigo exchanged a worried glance with Valentina before answering. "Yes, Mom, this is our home. I'm here with you, don't worry." Dona Luz looked at him, but her expression still reflected confusion. I don't remember how we got here." "Who is that woman?" she asked, pointing to Valentina. Rodrigo's heart sank. He knew this was another one of those moments when the illness was winning the battle. Valentina, however, remained calm and smiled warmly. "It's me, Dona Luz, Valentina. I'm here to help you." Dona Luz frowned, as if trying to remember, but the confusion persisted. I don't know where I am. I want to go home. My home, where I used to be." Rodrigo felt a pang of despair, but he tried to keep his voice steady. "Mom, we're at home. You're safe here with me. You don't need to go anywhere." For a moment, it seemed like Dona Luz didn't understand. But then, as if something clicked in her mind, she looked at him with an expression of sudden recognition. "Rodrigo, I'm sorry. I feel so lost sometimes." Rodrigo hugged her, feeling tears welling up in his eyes. "It's okay, Mom. I'm here. You don't have to apologize. We're in this together." Valentina watched the scene with a heavy heart, knowing how difficult it must be for both of them. She approached and placed a hand on Rodrigo's shoulder in a gesture of support. "We're going to get through this, Rodrigo. You're not alone." That night, after putting Dona Luz to bed, Rodrigo and Valentina sat in the living room, exhausted but determined to keep going. "It's so hard to see her like this," Rodrigo admitted, his voice trembling. "Sometimes I don't know how to keep going." Valentina looked at him with compassion. "I know, Rodrigo, but you're doing everything you can, and that's what matters. You're not alone in this. We're all here to help." Rodrigo nodded, knowing that Valentina was right. Thank you, Valentina. I don't know what I'd do without you. The days went on, and though there were moments of confusion and pain, there were also moments of connection and love. Rodrigo and Valentina made sure that Dona Luz felt as comfortable and safe as possible, creating an environment filled with warmth and care. Finally, there came a day when Rodrigo knew he had to make an important decision about the future. He sat down with Valentina and said, "I think it's time we considered a more permanent option for taking care of Mom. Something that ensures she always gets the care she needs, even if we can't be here." Valentina nodded, though the decision was hard to accept. "You're right, Rodrigo. We have to do what's best for her, even if it's painful." After much consideration, Rodrigo decided to find a specialized residence where Dona Luz could receive the constant care she needed, but where he could visit her every day. It was a decision that broke his heart, but he knew it was the best thing for his mother. The day they took Dona Luz to the residence was one of the hardest for Rodrigo. But seeing the warmth of the place and the care they provided for his mother, he knew he had made the right decision. The illness might be gaining ground, but the love he felt for his mother would never fade. As he said goodbye to Dona Luz that night, she looked at him and in a moment of clarity said, "Rodrigo, I know you're doing the right thing. Thank you for taking care of me." Rodrigo hugged her tightly, whispering, "I love you, Mom. I'll always be with you, no matter what." As they left the residence, Valentina took his arm and said, "You did the right thing, Rodrigo. She knows it, and that's what matters." Rodrigo nodded, feeling a mix of sadness and relief. He knew the road ahead would continue to be difficult, but he also knew he wasn't alone. With Valentina by his side and his mother's love as a guide, he would face any challenge that came his way. And so, despite the obstacles, the story of Dona Luz, Rodrigo, and Valentina continued, filled with love, challenges, and above all, hope. Together, they showed that even in the most difficult circumstances, love and compassion could light the way.